Tonight on Closer Look from the Inside the Village podcast. With tariffs now in place, the question is being asked, can you cancel your March break flight plans to the United States without penalty? We pose that question to Gabor Lukács, the president of Air Passenger Rights Canada. We're back on Inside the Village, and tonight we're taking a closer look at air travel in Canada. Of course, March break just around the corner with Michael Friscolanti, our editor-in-chief here at Village. I'm Scott Sexsmith. With us on the line from Air Passenger Rights Canada, the president, Gabor Lukács. Gabor, great to see you again. Appreciate your time tonight.
Great to be with you.
Gabor, we want to ask you some things about March break travel, but obviously in the last hour, the trade war is officially on here between Canada and the United States. Lots of rhetoric, lots of strong words from leaders on both sides of the border. And I'm just wondering if I'm a traveler today thinking, I'm flying to the United States next week for March break, and I'm not too comfortable with it now because there's this trade war going on. Is there any way I can get out of it, or am I stuck?
I'm afraid not. There is no provision in the airline's terms and conditions that would allow you to unilaterally cancel your travel just because of the trade war has started.
That's right.
If the airline cancels your flight and wants to rebook you to a later time, if they delay your flight by more than 3 hours, those type of situations could give you a basis for actually canceling under their passenger protection regulations. But just because you no longer want to go to there, that's not, unfortunately, a good reason.
So you can hope for a 3-hour delay, essentially, is what you have in your pocket. Are you getting any emails or phone calls from people? Because there is a lot of worried people who are now thinking, gee, I wish I didn't book that trip to the U.S.
Not so far, well, maybe a few, but people in our group probably understands the law, passenger rights sufficiently to know that you cannot just walk away from the contract, just the same way that airlines should not, at least theoretically, be allowed to walk away from the contract.
Gabor, it's been about 2.5 years, I think July of 2022, the last time you were on the program with us. Has it gotten any better in terms of air travel and our rights and our rights being violated?
I don't think so, although there is far more awareness among passengers that they do have some rights. So one thing that I would say is that maybe 2.5 years ago, more passengers just thought that they have to put up with many of the things they are experiencing. Now at least they're asking a question, do I have to put up with it? Is it really right that they are doing this to me? Is there any recourse that I have? In terms of enforcement, the federal regulator, the Canadian Transportation Agency, has been doing preciously little to enforce passengers' rights. They have a bloating backlog of passenger complaints. The latest data I have, just from a couple of days ago from a Canadian press article, is 85,000 cases. That's with all the budget that has gone into it, all the additional officers they have hired. And the source of these bloatings and complaints is primarily lack of enforcement and regulation that are written in such a way it takes disproportionate amount of time and effort to actually figure out whether compensation is owed.
So if I am a traveler getting ready, there's obviously thousands of them ready for the March break. What are 2 or 3 things you think they should keep in mind as they get to the airport and they're thinking about their rights, so to speak? What should they be keeping in mind as they get ready to fly out?
The most important right, perhaps, to bear in mind is your right to complete your travel as quickly as possible. Airlines do have an obligation to rebook you, and that obligation includes, in some cases, depending on the circumstances, rebooking on competitor airlines. In Canada, especially WestJet, but to some extent also Air Canada, loathe to rebook you on competitors. Mm-hmm. Just make sure you know your rights. They may tell you, we don't do it. It's not our policy to do it. But in some situations, which if you look at the wording of the Air Passenger Protection Regulations, is quite clear, you do have the right to be rebooked on a competitor airline, and if they don't do it themselves, you can buy yourself a ticket and then make the original airline pay for it. It's not an easy path, but you do have that right, and if you have an urgent travel, I would not just sit around and let the airline shortchange you.
And if that does happen, can I speak to the person at the counter and they'll agree with me that I have these rights, or do I have to escalate it?
What happens in practice is I would certainly give it a try at the desk, and I would also make sure to document the experience. I would record a conversation. I would record the interaction. You don't have to tell me you're recording, just so that later on they won't be able to tell you, well, we tried to revoke this poor guy, but he just was unreasonable. Mm-hmm. But often what you're going to hear is that they say, well, you may be right, sir, but our hands are tied. We don't have the ability to do so. I would ask in this case, okay, can you get your supervisor to do so? Because after all, I do have this right. But if they are really being uncooperative, I would say, okay, I understand that you are not able to do so. I just want to put you on notice that I would be relying on this as evidence in court, because I'm going out to buy a ticket myself and I'm going to hold the airline liable for these expenses.
And is that in cases even just weather, Gabor? Like if it's a weather delay for 5 hours, they still are obligated to put you on a competitor's airline?
Competitor airlines' obligations depend on the cause of the delay. So if it is weather and they cannot rebook you on their own next available flight that departs within 48 hours, then they have to buy you a ticket on a competitor. But if it is a delay or cancellation due to maintenance issues or business decisions, then if they cannot put you on next available flight that departs within 9 hours of the original departure time, then they have to put you on a competitor's flight. So there is a difference.
Yeah, there is, Gabor. Now, can you just describe for us, and I know a couple of years ago we were coming back from Mexico and we were delayed and Air Canada wasn't going to get us out for, I think it was 2.5 days from when we were supposed to catch our connection. Thankfully, you guided me through that, but not everybody has Gabor in their Rolodex to reach out to. So what are the airlines obligated to do in terms of overnight accommodations, meals, those kinds of things? Could you walk us through that?
Sure. So if we are talking about a situation within the carrier's control, such as maintenance issues, crew shortage, or business decisions, they all fall under the same umbrella, even if it's required for safety reasons. Under the current air passenger protection regulation, the airline has to provide you with meals and accommodation, communication, and ground transportation. That's a theory. In some cases, they may not, they will not. And then you go out and buy yourself a meal, get yourself a hotel, and then you seek reimbursement from the airline.
You mentioned backlogs in an earlier answer. Do you have any sense of the numbers in terms of are airlines paying more and more back to passengers in penalties or compensation for problems that have happened because there's been a little more publicity, in large part thanks to you?
We don't have data on that. I would say that passengers are not getting enough compensation because there are no big penalties being issued to the airlines under the existing legislation even for violating passengers' rights. So even currently, without any amendments that are being discussed, the airline could be fined up to $25,000 per violation per incident per passenger. But those fines are not being handed out. In most cases, a couple $100s per passenger is what is being issued. And one can show it economically, mathematically, that these kind of fines are insufficient, inadequate to actually make compliance with the law more efficient, more profitable than to disobey the law and occasionally pay a fine.
And Gabor, did I just read something the other day, and I think you spoke out on it, that now if airlines do settle with a passenger and pay them out, there's some form of a non-disclosure there where you can't talk about that award?
It's worse than it sounds, actually, because if you go to the Canadian Transportation Agency's backlogged and quite biased regime, their complaint resolution process, then even if it doesn't settle, but there's a binding decision, they say that you cannot talk about that. And that violates your constitutional rights, your Section 2B, freedom of expression, freedom of media, the open court principle. And we are certainly very concerned about that because it is not how Canada is supposed to operate.
Is anyone challenging that? Oh, sorry, I cut you off, Gabor. Go ahead.
In Canada, the open court principle, which is constitutionally protected, requires that legal proceedings that result in legally binding outcomes be transparent, open to the public, because justice not only has to be done, but has to be seen done.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We know that very well. As a journalism organization, we take that principle extremely seriously. Is that being challenged anywhere? Is anyone challenging that?
It's not so far. And latest news is that now the Canadian Transportation Agency is proposing to make some changes that would allow it also to fine passengers or even news media who breach that obligation to keep that type of decisions confidential. And that is unprecedented in Canada and profoundly troubling.
It really makes people feel confident about what's going on with the airlines, that we have to keep all this secret. Gabor, do you have holiday plans over the March break? Are you flying anywhere? Or are you staying home answering emails?
I will be in Halifax for the March break.
Do you think you'll be getting a lot of notes from folks?
Yeah, I perhaps it's a good opportunity to apologize for not being able to respond to everybody. Even the Facebook is very, very, very busy.
Gabor, before we let you go, any message you'd like to share with travelers preparing for this busy March break season? And if you had to give them a piece of advice before they get to the airport, what would it be?
Make sure that you know your rights, that you are prepared in advance to situations you may encounter, that you know where to look for information when it happens.
All right, good stuff. Gabor Lukacs, the president of Air Passenger Rights Canada. Gabor, good to see you as always. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me.